The swivel screen paradox. The screen turns toward you before you've even picked up your coffee. There's a brief moment of hesitation, a flash of social friction, and a quick mental calculation. Did they do enough to earn this, or am I just paying their wage? In recent years, Americans have given this daily anxiety a modern name: tip fatigue. We point our frustration at technology, blaming payment processing apps like Square or Toast for dragging an old dining habit onto everyday counters where it never used to belong. We look back at mid-century America with nostalgia, imagining a simpler time when a tip was just a quiet cash token of gratitude left on a table for exceptional service. While software interface design certainly amplified the pressure, the underlying reason American service industries depend on customer tips was engineered long before touchscreens existed. It is the result of a century-old legal structure, one that made it legal for full-service employers to pay staff a direct cash wage of just $2.13 an hour, while almost every other major industrial democracy treats tips as an occasional bonus on top of a full standard wage. The United States built an entire economic sector on the idea that customers, not employers, should pay for labor directly. To understand why this screen exists, you have to go back to a time when giving a tip in America was not seen as generosity. It was condemned as an insult to democracy itself. Flunkyism and the American plan. In the early decades of the 19th century, if you walked into an American inn or tavern, you would not find a tip prompt on the bill, nor would you leave a coin on the table. American lodging operated under what was known as the American plan, or table d'hôte. For a single flat rate, guests received a bed and shared meals at a long common table alongside the innkeeper and fellow travelers. European visitors, accustomed to tipping servants back home, recorded their surprise in travel memoirs. When foreign guests tried to offer extra money to American waitstaff, workers frequently refused it. To accept a gratuity was to accept a master-servant hierarchy, an idea that directly conflicted with the post-revolutionary ideal of civic equality among free citizens. In the antebellum United States, a tip was viewed as a corrupting bribe that implied one human being was subservient to another. Then came the Gilded Age. Following the Civil War, rapid industrialization created a new class of wealthy Americans who traveled extensively across Europe. There, they encountered the feudal practice of vails, gratuities given to private estate servants to secure extra attention. When these wealthy tourists returned home, they brought the custom back to luxury hotels and dining rooms in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. They used tipping as a public display of status, signaling that they possessed the wealth and clout of European aristocrats. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Newspapers condemned tipping as un-American, labeling it flunkyism and a foreign import designed to create a permanent servant class in a free republic. While Gilded Age elites brought the custom back from Europe as a display of status, a rapidly expanding corporate empire in Chicago was about to turn this luxury habit into a permanent payroll strategy. The Pullman Standard. In 1867, industrialist George Pullman founded the Pullman Palace Car Company, building luxurious railroad cars that revolutionized long-distance travel across the expanding American West. To staff his sleeping cars, Pullman made a calculated operational choice. He recruited thousands of newly freed black men from the South to work as porters, onboard attendants responsible for carrying luggage, shining shoes, making beds, and serving passengers around the clock. Pullman understood the social dynamics of Reconstruction-era America. By hiring formerly enslaved workers, he provided thousands of men with steady employment in a country that offered them almost none. But his business model contained a crucial structural feature. Pullman paid his porters meager cash wages, explicitly expecting them to cover their basic living costs through tips from white passengers. In effect, Pullman transformed the European luxury tip. It was no longer an optional bonus for exceptional service. It became the worker's primary means of survival, allowing the Pullman Company to transfer its direct labor costs onto its customers. This payroll strategy quickly spread beyond the railways. Across the Reconstruction South and expanding northern cities, hotels, restaurants, barbershops, and transit companies adopted the Pullman model. Employers realized that by hiring black workers and later immigrant service workers, they could pay nominal direct wages, leaving workers entirely reliant on the whims of patrons. By the turn of the 20th century, tipping was no longer just an aristocratic habit in high-end dining rooms. It had become a corporate mechanism used across the country to keep service sector payroll costs near zero. As Pullman's strategy spread, millions of ordinary Americans decided they had seen enough and took the fight straight to state legislatures, the Legislative Revolt. By 1905, popular outrage over tipping exploded into a national political movement. Ordinary citizens complained that they could no longer get a meal, fetch their luggage, or check a coat without being forced to pay an unofficial surcharge. In 1905, disgruntled travelers organized the Anti-Tipping Society of America in Georgia, mounting a national campaign that quickly grew to over 100,000 members. In 1916, writer William Scott published a scathing anti-tipping manifesto titled The Itching Palm. Scott captured the populist sentiment of the era, writing that tipping was an aristocratic disease that operated as a form of petty extortion, degrading both the worker who received it and the customer who gave it. This was not just cultural complaining, it became statutory law. Between 1909 and 1915, 6 state legislatures, Washington, Mississippi, Arkansas, Iowa, South Carolina, and Tennessee, passed sweeping laws that completely criminalized tipping. Georgia enacted similar statutory restrictions. In these states, giving or receiving a tip could result in a misdemeanor conviction, fines, or jail time. For a brief moment, it appeared that the United States would legally eradicate tipping, preserving the early American ideal of direct, fixed pricing for goods and services. By 1915, anti-tipping advocates looked like they were winning. But a major shift in how businesses sold food and rooms was about to wipe those laws off the books. Unbundling the bill. While state lawmakers were criminalizing tips, the business model of American hospitality was undergoing a fundamental structural transformation. For decades, hotels and inns had relied on the American plan, charging guests an all-inclusive rate for lodging and free family-style meals a day. But as urban transit expanded and business travel accelerated in the 1910s and 1920s, hotels shifted toward the European plan. Under the European plan, accommodations and meals were unbundled. Guests paid a lower base price for a room and purchased meals separately from an à la carte menu. Unbundling gave consumers lower upfront prices, but it unbundled service costs as well. Restaurants and hotels used lower menu prices to attract customers, while expecting patrons to pay the waitstaff directly through tips. At the same time, state anti-tipping laws proved almost impossible to enforce. Transactions took place in private, between individual customers and workers who depended on those gratuities to survive. Employers lobbied fiercely against the bans, arguing that outlawing tips would force them to dramatically raise menu prices and room rates. One by one, state supreme courts began striking down anti-tipping statutes as unconstitutional infringements on the freedom of contract. Where courts did not intervene, state legislatures quietly repealed the statutes under heavy pressure from business associations. By 1926, every single state anti-tipping law in the country had been repealed or struck down. The practice had survived its greatest legal challenge. When the federal government finally stepped in to guarantee a national minimum wage during the Great Depression, hospitality employers made sure the new rules didn't apply to them. Section 3(m) and the tip credit. In 1938, in the depths of the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the landmark Fair Labor Standards Act, creating America's first national minimum wage of 25 cents an hour. The law was designed to establish a basic floor of dignity for American labor. But to pass the bill through a resistant Congress, federal lawmakers made critical compromises with Southern lawmakers and service industry lobbies. Large categories of low-wage workers were explicitly excluded from the original 1938 law, including agricultural workers, domestic laborers, and service employees in retail, hotels, and restaurants. For nearly 3 decades, service workers remained outside federal minimum wage protections. It wasn't until 1966, amid the political momentum of the civil rights movement, that Congress finally amended the Fair Labor Standards Act to bring hotel, restaurant, and service employees under federal protection. But service industry groups fought for a crucial legal concession. In the 1966 amendments, Congress codified a new legal mechanism known as Section 3M, the tip credit. Under Section 3M, employers were no longer required to pay service employees the full statutory minimum wage out of their own pockets. Instead, the law permitted employers to pay a reduced cash wage, taking a credit, against the tips their workers received from customers. If a worker's tips equaled at least 50% of the standard minimum wage, the employer only had to pay the remaining 50% in cash. For the first time in American history, federal law did not eliminate the practice of offloading payroll onto customers. It institutionalized it. For 3 decades, the tipped minimum wage rose automatically whenever the regular minimum wage went up, until a quiet legislative decoupling in 1996 froze it in time, the $2.13 freeze. In 1996, Congress debated raising the national minimum wage from $4.25 to $5.15 an hour. Restaurant and hospitality trade organizations lobbied heavily against the increase, warning that paying full higher cash wages to tipped employees would force thousands of small restaurants to close. Congress reached a bipartisan compromise that changed American labor policy for the next generation. In the Small Business Job Protection Act of 1996, lawmakers raised the standard minimum wage but explicitly severed the link between the standard minimum wage and the tipped floor. The law permanently locked the required direct cash wage for tipped workers at $2.13 per hour, where it had sat since 1991. Under federal law, if a worker's combined cash wage of $2.13 plus their actual tips does not equal the full federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, the employer is legally obligated to make up the difference. However, 7 U.S. states, including California, Washington, and Oregon, have completely eliminated the tip credit, requiring employers to pay tipped staff full state minimum wage before tips. But in over half the country, the federal cash floor remains locked at $2.13 an hour. Which brings us back to that coffee counter screen, and why modern tech companies didn't invent this pressure but simply scaled it. The automated subsidy. When software developers designed modern digital point-of-sale systems like Square and Toast, they didn't create new labor economics. They built software tools optimized for the legal reality that American businesses already inhabited. By expanding preset tip prompts to counter service, takeout windows, and coffee bars, places where tips were once rare, payment systems enabled businesses facing rising real estate, ingredient, and credit card processing costs to maintain lower posted menu prices. The prompt on the screen is not an accidental feature of digital software. It is the digital evolution of an economic model that began on George Pullman's sleeper cars in 1867, survived state bans in 1915, and was codified into federal law in 1966. Whether you are tipping at a sit-down restaurant where workers earn a statutory sub-minimum wage, or at a counter where software prompts have normalized the habit, you are participating in an economic system engineered to make customer gratuities cover core business payroll. The next time a screen turns around asking for 20%, remember, you aren't just paying for service, you are navigating a century-old system built to make customer gratuities an essential part of business payroll.